Urgent question, Chuka Umunna.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Cabinet Office Minister to make a statement on the findings of the Electoral Commission into the conduct of their campaign by Vote Leave.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. I am proud to say... Sorry, Mr Speaker, is there a... No, as I begin my words?
No, it's just a general air of excitement.
Excellent. Well, let's take that and work with it. Mr Speaker, I am proud to say that the UK has a clear and robust electoral system, and we should all be proud of the democracy in which we live and work. I would like to place on record my thanks to all those involved in the electoral community who work hard at every poll to deliver it within the law, such that we can be proud of our democracy. The Electoral Commission is the independent body that oversees the conduct of elections and referendums and regulates political finance. The Commission reports regularly on the running of elections and referendums, conducts thorough investigations into allegations that rules have been breached. Electoral law exists to ensure fair campaigning, and the Electoral Commission has determined that those rules have been broken. Both Vote Leave and BeLeave have been fined and referred to the police. It would not be appropriate for the government to comment on ongoing police investigations. That electoral rules have been breached is rightly a cause for concern, Mr Speaker, but that does not mean that the rules themselves were flawed. The government will continue to work closely with the Electoral Commission, along with many other stakeholders in the electoral system, to protect the integrity, security and effectiveness of referendums and elections. Let me make it also clear for the record that we will continue to implement the referendum's results and to make a success of it.
Chuka Umunna.
Findings of the Electoral Commission are shocking, and Vote Leave's actions an affront to our democracy and that fundamental British value of fair play. The Commission's legal counsel described Vote Leave's behaviour as follows. They resisted our investigation from the start, including contesting our right as the statutory regulator to open the investigation. They refused to cooperate, refused our request to put forward a representative for interview, and forced us to use our legal powers to compel it to provide evidence. Who do these people think they are? They think they are above the law, with new facts arising every week. It's well known there will be no £350 million extra per week for the NHS and so on. We know their claims turned out to be a fantasy, but we now know they cheated too, and it's official. Given there was a 4% gap between Leave and Remain, and Vote Leave overspent by just under 8%, does the Minister agree with me that we cannot say with confidence that this foul play did not impact on the result? Does the Minister believe that Vote Leave acted in contravention of natural justice and our democracy in acting in the obstructive way they acted? What urgent legislation will the government bring forward to address the Electoral Commission's serious concerns about the enforcement regime for electoral law which they've raised today? And who was at the scene of these crimes? The organisation was co-led by the current Environment Secretary, who co-convened its campaign committee. Where is he? Why isn't he here? That committee was charged with overseeing the implementation, Mr Speaker, of a framework that included the way in which fundraising was conducted and donations collected. He, along with the former Foreign Secretary, was part of a core group of that committee that met on a daily basis to ensure the campaign was on track. As such, either the Environment Secretary knew what was going on, which is a very serious matter, or if he didn't, how can we have any confidence that he's capable of overseeing his department? What did he know? The International Trade Secretary, the Transport Secretary and the BrExit Secretary also sat on that committee. What did they know about what was going on? In short, Mr Speaker, members of the Cabinet sat in an organisation which has been found to have flouted our democracy. Does this not all demonstrate that we need a full, urgent public inquiry into the Leave campaign, given that it calls into question the legitimacy of the entire Brexit process, which is preoccupying this House?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What this report demonstrates is that we have an electoral regulator that operates to rules which Parliament has set and which has found people in contravention of those rules. He asked a number of questions which go severely away from the report. And just to be clear, the report, and I'm reading here from its front page, is of an investigation in respect of Vote Leave Limited, Mr Darren Grimes, Believe and Veterans for Britain. It is not in respect of a number of others that he raised, and so therefore I'm not going to enter into those questions, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'm not going to enter into discussions of other named individuals. I'm simply not going to. And nor am I going to enter into discussion of ongoing investigations, whether those be in terms of police or whether those be in terms of courts. I hear honourable members, Mr Speaker, asking me why not. Do we really need to begin by asking ourselves why the government should not interfere in independent investigations and police examinations? I cannot believe that the Labour Party needs the answer to that this early in the morning. What I would say is, as I said early in my remarks to start with, we are getting on and delivering the result of the referendum, Mr Speaker. We have set that out very clearly as to why we think that is the right thing to do. And it is fundamentally this, that we believe in the people's ability to have made a choice. That is why we respect the referendum result. It is unfortunately clear that the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, actually does not believe in the people's ability to choose, and I think argues instead that they should be asked again and again. I do not agree with those arguments, Mr Speaker, but what I am here today to do is nonetheless to answer questions on this report of an independent regulator. I can do so within my powers, and I'm happy to do so.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Mr Speaker, on a more general point to my honourable friend, will she agree with me that one of the great glories of this sadly now diminished country was our electoral and democratic system? Yeah. And this example today is gross. And I say to her that if we are to retain the integrity and the trust of the voting public, the whole damn thing needs to be blown up and started all over again.
Mr Speaker, I understand the seriousness of that point, and the points made earlier by the right honourable gentleman, which were similar. But what I would just note is that the rules we are looking at in this report that's in front of us today are rules that comprise our democracy. Our democracy comprises of having such rules, amongst some other very important principles. But essentially, our democracy is underpinned by the having of such rules. That the rules were broken means that the system is, in fact, working, that we have a regulator that is able to conduct an investigation is one of the things that marks out the quality of our democracy. But that the rules were broken doesn't actually mean that the rules in themselves were flawed. And what I would just say in concluding answer to my right honourable friend's question, Parliament, over the course of many years, has put in place those rules for referenda and for elections. What my right honourable friend asked for was a wholesale reform, if I heard him correctly, of all of those rules. That is a very large undertaking indeed, and it is something that goes wider than the report we have in front of us here today. I would note there are other ongoing investigations as well, Mr Speaker, for example, such as by the Information Commissioner, and that ought to be looked at in the round by Parliament.
Matheson.
Mr Speaker, can I congratulate my honourable friend from Streatham for securing this urgent question and for his introductory remarks. Today's report from the Electoral Commission is a devastating indictment of the official Leave campaign's conduct during the referendum, which has been found to be based on cheating and law-breaking. Financial expenditure was deliberately coordinated through what now appears to be nothing more than front organisations, and Vote Leave failed to cooperate with the Electoral Commission inquiry. It showed a contempt for the law set by this House, which makes a mockery of claims to take back control and displays a breathtaking arrogance of people who clearly believed that the law of the land did not apply to them. We only got to hear about these activities because of the bravery of whistleblowers. What was the response of those involved? They outed one of those whistleblowers as gay. without his permission and therefore put him and his family at risk. One of the people responsible for this outing was working as a senior advisor in Downing Street. The Prime Minister refused to sack him, so presumably she supports, or at least excuses, Mr Speaker, these monstrous actions. Will she now, on the back of this report, dismiss him as an advisor? And of course, as my honourable friend has mentioned, senior members of the government were involved in the Vote Leave campaign. These included the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the recently departed Foreign Secretary, who is uncharacteristically silent today. Will they now come to the House and explain their role in both the initial scandal and the cover-up? If the leaders of the Vote Leave campaign cannot be trusted to abide by the rules of the referendum, how can we trust them to abide by the rules of any future election? Or indeed, how can we trust them to conduct their ministerial duties with honour and integrity and honesty? So can the Minister tell us if those leaders of the Vote Leave campaign who are now ministers or who are former ministers will be referred to the Cabinet Secretary for investigation as to whether they have broken the ministerial code? Yet again, we've been confronted this week by the chaos of this government has got itself and the country into, dumping its own Euro civil war on the rest of us and sowing division throughout. It's Brexit extremists at war with their own Prime Minister and a government that at every stage has put party before country. Honourable members in this House and the public are entitled to ask how on earth we got here. Yet British politics and the British people deserve better than this. We cannot allow cheating and dishonesty to become the accepted norms in our political system. So let me ask the Minister, what is her proposal to bring decent, honest politics back to the fore? Because if this government has not got any, perhaps it's time they moved aside for a government that has.
Minister Smith.
Mr Speaker, given that the Labour front bench is so committed to propriety, perhaps it should be reporting itself to the police for its national spending in the 2015 general election, whereupon the Labour Party was fined by the Electoral Commission in October 2016. They are on thin ice if they think that they are able to say that this cuts only one way. It does not. It does not. But what we have in front of us here today is a report of an investigation in respect of named individuals. I have already said that I'm not going to comment on investigations that are ongoing, and that covers a number of the points that the honourable gentleman has just raised. But I will say again, the Electoral Commission is an independent organisation. It can undertake any investigation it feels it necessary. And indeed, it can report back to this House, Mr Speaker, as you know, of course, through your own commission, through your own committee on the Commission. That is its governance. But the point is this. We need to be able to say to the public that are watching this debate that we are getting on with delivering the result of the referendum in which they voted. I can hear some of the honourable members opposite shouting about this. Perhaps that is that fraction of the Labour Party that believes in having a second referendum, or perhaps it's that fraction of the Labour Party that believes in not having that, or perhaps it's that fraction of the Labour Party that doesn't know what it believes in. What we believe in is that our independent...
I understand there is very considerable angst about this matter, and I do want to accommodate colleagues who wish to question the Minister, but the Minister's answers must be heard. The Minister.
Mr Speaker, we have an independent electoral regulator. It has done its work. I applaud it for doing its work. I am pleased that we have a regulator to be able to make such investigations into our democracy, and that is what comprises our democracy. That we have rules that can be investigated is what makes this a democracy. That is a good thing. But as I said before, Mr Speaker, there are questions that arise here from this investigation and others which are still ongoing, and those ought to be looked at in the round in due course, and the government, where appropriate, will come back to this House, of course, to do so.
Amber Rudd.
Mr Speaker, this matters. Could I respectfully say to the Minister that she should not let the government's commitment to delivering on the referendum result to obfuscate from the real questions that are being raised here? There have been a series, this has not come out of the blue, there have been a series of accusations and suggestions, not just in this campaign but in others, but protecting the valid confidence that the public needs to have in our elections of every type is absolutely vital.
Yeah, that's right. My right honourable friend is right, and we should all be in agreement here today that what we should be seeking to do is protect confidence in our democracy. That is precisely the point here. And the point here is that the regulator has made this investigation, and we should be able to look at its report and understand what it is saying. That is today's job in hand. After that, there may come things that we need to return to as a House, including various aspects of regulation, which would, of course, be a matter for Parliament to do. I made the point earlier on that the extent of regulation that we do apply to our democracy is quite great. It's been put together by Parliament over many decades. As my right honourable friend says, this matters. This does all matter, absolutely. And that is why we should all be prepared to look at this report and the other ongoing investigations and look at such things in the round.
Tommy Sheppard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is presiding over crisis and chaos as it drags the country towards an exercise in collective self-harm on an unprecedented scale. It's doing that on the back of a campaign which was morally questionable, based as it was on mobilising fear and prejudice, politically questionable, based as it was on glib half-truths and lies, and now we know a campaign that was organised illegally. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's responses are woefully inadequate. We need to know if the government will draw a line between itself and the people implicated in this illegality. If it does not do so, then it will lose any respect and integrity it has left. So I would like an assurance from the Minister now that anyone who was involved in working for Vote Leave or on its board will cease to hold office in government or cease to be on the government payroll.
Mr. Speaker, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not going to make that commitment here today because there are a number of questions that are raised in this report which are still subject to ongoing investigations. And as I've already pointed out, that is in itself one of the important principles of our democracy and of the way that regulation works independently of government. So the short answer is no, I am not going to give such commitments here today.
Order. There is extensive interest in this subject, and I have granted the urgent question for the very simple reason that I have judged it to be urgent. So I'm keen to accommodate colleagues, but I remind the House that there is a statement to follow and that the debate on the first group of amendments to the trade bill, new clauses and amendments, has to conclude by 3:30, and there must be some time for debate on those matters, otherwise it rather obviates the purpose of the remaining stages. So I will call some colleagues, but today there may be some colleagues disappointed. I'll do my best, and I ask colleagues to help each other. Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, will my honourable friend put the synthetic outrage of Remain campaigners into some kind of context by reminding the House that many of those same Remain supporters in this House tried to change the Electoral Commission's rules on referendums to enable the government to breach the PERDA rules? Fortunately, that attempt by the then government was thwarted by this House. So many of those Remainers would have liked to have had a relaxed PERDA arrangement.
I believe my right honourable friend's point there reminds us of something I remarked earlier on, that there are arguments within this which do cut both ways, and I think he is highlighting that he sees an example of an infraction in another direction, and what I would simply say is this: I return to the point that we in the government are getting on with implementing the results of the referendum. We think that is the correct response to being able to retain the people's trust in our democracy, and that, as has already been said, matters.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there is any moral equivalence between members in this House attempting to change the law and organisations outside this House breaking it. Because today we find found out that Vote Leave did break electoral law. Our democracy is fragile and we have a responsibility to protect it and not take it for granted. Mr Speaker, how can we look the next generation in the eye and tell them to have faith in British politics when we know that false claims have been made, the rules have been broken, there's been international and foreign interference, and the legitimacy of the most important vote in a generation has been undermined so profoundly?
Mr Speaker, because we have an investigation, is the answer to her question. We can look voters in the eye and say that where rules have been broken, punishments follow. That is what this report says.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Mr Speaker, the reality is that punishments aren't following here. We're talking about deliberate cheating, and this money going to a firm which used highly sophisticated, targeted Facebook advertising. And in a quote since removed from the Aggregate IQ website, Vote Leave campaign director Dominic Cummings says, "We couldn't have done it without them." Dominic Cummings, who will not appear before select committees, having claimed during the campaign that he wanted to restore the sovereignty of Parliament, runs away from accountability himself. Consequences must follow. We cannot have confidence that this referendum was secure and it should be rerun.
Mr Speaker, this report is very clear that consequences do follow. The Electoral Commission has issued fines and referred both Vote Leave and the BeLeave founder to the police. That is what I refer to when I say consequences and punishments are following.
Pat McFadden.
Mr Speaker, I reported the Leave campaign's intentions to both the Electoral Commission and the police 2.5 years ago and 4 months before the referendum itself. In February 2016, the Honourable Member for Wickham, who was then a leading campaigner with the Leave campaign, wrote to colleagues saying, and I quote, "It is open to the Vote Leave family to create separate legal entities, each of which could spend £700,000. Vote Leave will be able to spend as much money as is necessary to win the referendum."
Wow.
The Electoral Commission's rules are specifically to stop this kind of practice. They say, and I quote again, that we should stop people getting around the spending limit by coordinating several campaigns at the same time. It is precisely that now that we've established that spending limits were broken by the Leave campaign through separate legal entities following a common plan to get around the rules. Why is it that when such intent was reported 4 months before the referendum, it's taken 2.5 years to get to this conclusion? What does it say about the integrity of this result? And isn't it ironic that this so-called People's Revolt against the elites was conspiring from the get-go to get around the rules with limitless money from goodness knows what source? Doesn't she agree this needs to be fully investigated to cleanse the cloud that has been cast over our democracy by these...
Mr Speaker, it is exactly the case that allegations of impropriety should be investigated. That is, as I've been saying a number of times here, it is that means we have a robust democracy. Now, I hear the honourable gentleman's story. Now, in part, I think it ends with this investigation. An investigation has been done, and it should be welcomed that it has been done and has found a result. But if, on the other hand, the honourable gentleman's points are about the efficacy of the Electoral Commission in doing so, that they took 2.5 years, I think that is what he was driving at, then that actually is a matter for Parliament. The Electoral Commission is accountable to Parliament through your committee, Mr Speaker. It is indeed an independent regulator of government, as it should be, and it is accountable to Parliament for how it conducts investigations, or indeed whether it does so quickly enough.
Soubry.
Mr Speaker, it won't have escaped your notice, and I know it won't have escaped the Minister's notice, that one of the most respected members of this House, my right honourable friend, the member for Mid Sussex, in condemning what has occurred in the Leave campaign, has gone so far as to call for a rerunning of the referendum. These are serious matters. They go to the heart of government, and of course they go to the heart of democracy and the trust that people must have in the democratic process. There are not only concerns about the overspend, there are concerns about the source of the money. And the evidence is mounting. It is clearly there that another country, let's be honest, Russia, exercised its influence to undermine this country's democracy and indeed this country's security, as they have a long history of doing. May I say to the Minister, please, this is not a party political matter. It's nothing about delivering BrExit. It's about democracy. Can she give us an assurance that this government will take these very important matters extremely seriously and act now upon them?
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely can give that assurance that the government takes these matters extremely seriously. That is the very point here. The very point here is that we have a precious democracy which demands our protection, and that is what we do by having an electoral commission, an independent regulator that can make such investigations, publish them, expose the points of that investigation to scrutiny, be held accountable in its turn by Parliament. And then it is for Parliament to consider whether in the round there are amendments that might need to be made to the rules against which the regulator does that. That is actually the landscape that I think we are looking at here.
Tom Brake.
Vote Leave was a deeply dishonest campaign with deeply dishonest slogans and a cast of right-wingers who were prepared to go to any lengths to achieve their ideological endgame, and now we know they cheated and broke the law. Can the Minister confirm whether the members for Surrey Heath, Uxbridge and others involved are going to be jointly liable for the Vote Leave fine? And can she confirm that, of course, this strengthens immeasurably the case for there to be a final say on the deal and a chance to exit from BrExit?
All right.
Mr. Speaker, no, I'm not going to be in a position to comment on individuals. I've already said that very, very clearly. What I will say again, for the benefit of the Liberal Democrat Party, is that we are going to be delivering the referendum result, and we do not intend to hold a second referendum.
Gerald Gillan.
Mr. Speaker, I regret the atmosphere in which this UQ is taking place. I have just spent 9 months sitting on the Independent Commission on Referendums under UCL and the Constitution Unit, looking at what is wrong with the rules on referendums. And we looked specifically at financing, and a member of the party opposite also sat on that referendum. We've looked at the use of public funding, spending limits and transparency, and there is a common concern that our regulation does not fit the purpose that we would like to see in a modern democracy. Can I recommend to my honourable friend on the front bench that she reads this report cover to cover and takes on board our recommendations for new regulations and new legislation to try and improve this area, which, after all, is a very important part of our democracy these days.
Mr. Speaker, I have begun to read that report, and I welcome it. I welcome its thoughtful nature about how referenda fit into the rest of our elections landscape. I look forward to discussing more with her and her colleagues on it.
These are extremely serious matters. That said, we do need much shorter questions if we're to have a chance of accommodating some colleagues, and short answers as well, because we'll have to move on in a quarter of an hour or so. And Mr. David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, we have in our democracy clear rules, not so that we exercise or see the exercise of undue influence. And for that reason, certainly in the last decade, we've had 2 elections declared void in South Thanet and Oldham East. Can she confirm, can the government declare this referendum void on the basis of the evidence that we've been provided by the Electoral Commission? And if not, given this was an advisory referendum by this Parliament, can she bring forward the vote in this Parliament to declare this referendum void?
No, the government will not be bringing forward such a proposal.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Let the law take its course. By what factor did the government and the other Remain campaigns outspend the Leave campaigns? It was 2 to 1, wasn't it?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend reminds us that there are designated campaigners, Leave campaigners in referenda. The subject matter of this report is, of course, in part how Leave campaigners interacted with other campaigners. I think the virtue of having this report is that it allows us to examine spending. It brings spending into the light. It is about transparency of spending, as is, of course, the rest of the apparatus of what we do to regulate elections. This is an examination of allegations rather than, of course, the whole transparency, the whole data set. And again, my right honourable friend reminds us that there are people. My right honourable friend reminds us that there are people who feel that these arguments cut both ways.
Pete Wishart.
A £60,000 fine, peanuts to them. Found guilty, they could not care less and instead defiantly lash out. For these Brexiteers and all the UK parties, our electoral laws are an optional extra and fines but a mere electoral expense. When are we going to get serious about our electoral laws? Because no one takes them seriously, no political party takes them seriously. It's time to review the whole useless, ineffective system. When will she do it?
Well, I'm sorry if he thinks that his political party doesn't take these rules seriously. We do.
David T.C. Davis.
Mr. Speaker, can my right honourable friend confirm that the faux outrage that we're hearing today from members on all sides of this House, some of whom have now left, is nothing to do with a breach of the rules by the Leave campaign? It is due to the fact that they lost. They're not representing the people. They lost that referendum despite the fact that they overspent themselves by millions of pounds.
Mr. Speaker, I did come today to try to respond both to subject matter in the report, but also to lay on the record again very clearly that I think what people in the country want us to do is to get on with delivering the result rather than go back over it.
Bradshaw.
The government proposes legislation.
That's right.
The Electoral Commission has made specific recommendations to the government about what it needs to do. Will she do it?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman, I think, is referring to the Electoral Commission's earlier report on digital campaigning, which I am considering very carefully, of course. As I said at the early part of my remarks, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of issues here to look at in the round. There are other ongoing reports and investigations, such as that from the Information Commissioner, who last week produced a progress report, but not their final report. Now, it is important, as he will know from his experience in government, to be able to look at those things together, and that is what the government will do.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my honourable friends confirm that the government, in the run-up to the EU membership referendum, spent over £9.25 million on a taxpayer-funded leaflet advocating that we remain members of the European Union?
Mr. Speaker, that is the case, that such a leaflet was produced, and it was because the government recognises the importance of the public being informed ahead of a referendum. I mean, again, I think the debate, even on that leaflet itself, if I may say, has been had, and the point is we should now get on and implement the result.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel slightly sorry for the Honourable Lady because she's been sent to defend the indefensible. But I just wonder whether she could tell us, given her complacent demeanour today and her complete lack of acknowledgement about how serious this issue is, quite how big a scandal would have to be before she actually reacted to it appropriately.
I'm sorry the Right Honourable Lady has felt the need to get quite so personal. I'm not complacent. She will have heard me, if she was listening carefully, say that these issues are very, very serious. What I am also saying is that the government respects the work of an independent regulator and does not comment on its ongoing investigations, but will wish, of course, to look in the round at the result of all of those investigations that are ongoing.
Leigh.
Has the government received any representations from the Labour front bench to rerun the referendum?
Not at the last count, although I think there were 60-odd individuals who did want to do so, but I'm not sure whether they're on or off the front bench at this time.
Caroline Lucas.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I must say the government's response to electoral fraud is shockingly, obscenely complacent. And I would say to her that in terms of trying to give some impression that she's taking this seriously, could she agree to 3 really simple things? For the first thing, the fines should be unlimited. £20,000 is pitiful. It's a tap on the wrist. Secondly, campaigns should declare their expenditure online in real time, so they can't overspend in this way. And thirdly, would she agree that we need a digital Bill of Rights, so we clear up the data harvesting that's been going on an industrial scale by organisations like Facebook?
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Honourable Lady's policy suggestions as a contribution to this point. And if she'll forgive me, she underlines exactly what I've been saying, that we need to look at a number of these issues in the round. For example, the last point that she made there doesn't actually at all come from this report that's in front of us today. It comes from the Information Commissioner's work. She helps to make my point that we need to look at these issues in the round.
Simon Hoare.
Mr. Speaker, this is undoubtedly a very shoddy affair, and in hindsight and on reflection, the referendum campaign on either side of the argument was not our finest hour in democratic activity. Would my honourable friend, following on the point from the Honourable Lady from Brighton, take the point about the reporting in real time of expenditure? Doing it post the event leads to the sort of situation that we have at the moment. And if we don't address this matter of real-time reporting, the shysters and the snake oil salesmen who seek to undermine our democracy will have won.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, again, I welcome those. I welcome that as a policy consideration that ought to be looked at in the round, alongside the results of a number of ongoing investigations here. But I just return to the core point. We have these rules in place, and it is these rules which buttress our democracy. It is these rules that comprise us having an independent democracy where sanctions follow misdemeanours, and that is what that report tells us today.
Leigh.
She won't talk about the specifics in this case. Will she then address a very simple general question? Can she envisage any level of corruption so gross that it would ever invalidate any referendum?
Mr. Speaker, I'm really not in a position to answer the question. He tries to tempt me with a yes or a no or a very simple question. But this is not a simple matter. What we have is a number of reports across a number of different investigations with a number of elements that are still ongoing, and it is for that reason that I have come here, Mr. Speaker, and tried to be very clear in a way that I hope is understood by parliamentarians, that I cannot prejudge the investigations of independent bodies. But what I would say is this, if you bear with me for one second, Mr. Speaker, what I would also offer to the House as a thought is this. Those who have looked at election regulation over time, which includes many members of this House who've been serving here for some decades in some cases, have not seen fit to place in those election rules the idea that a result can be invalidated. I'm simply stating the current law there, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't yet exist in our law. It would be a new concept, but it hasn't yet been seen fit to be put in place by Parliament.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, transparency is hugely important. Following on from this report and knowing that we do have investigations ongoing, does my right honourable friend agree with me that all investigations into our elections and the running of our democracy generally must be conducted in a way that is thorough, that's transparent, and that people have faith in?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly my view, and that they should be done by an independent organisation that is given the space and time to conclude its investigations.
Nandy.
I never thought I would see
see the day when a government minister would come to this House and seek to downplay one of the most serious attacks on our democracy in history. This isn't just about overspending, as important as that is. This is about dark money, this is about foreign interference in our democracy, and this is about serious misuse of data. The government must commit to a full police-led investigation of all aspects of this. I suspect I know why she won't. There are at least 4 sitting members of her cabinet who aren't here today, who served on the campaign committee for the organisation in question, and that is even more reason why this government must stand up now for our democracy and against its abuse.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady, quite right by now, is quite seriously misrepresenting my words. What I have said here today is that these are very serious matters. I have agreed with all the right honourable members and honourable members around this House who say that this matters, this is serious. That is precisely my point. The Honourable Lady went on to say that this ought to be the subject of a police investigation. It is. Individuals from this investigation are being investigated by the police. The Honourable Lady also said that this is...
Order. Resume your seat, Minister, please. I say 2 things. First of all, members shouldn't stand up while an answer is being given. I think that's not the right way to operate in the chamber. But secondly, if I may very politely say so, I think the Minister could help herself if she would give somewhat pithier answers. It would be most unfortunate if people thought that long answers were preventing other people having the chance to ask a question. So a short answer, not a disquisition, is what is required. Minister, we're grateful.
I shall leave that one there, Mr. Speaker, and wait for the next one.
Thank you. Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's own words are that this cuts both ways. But I don't think so, Mr. Speaker, because the Electoral Commission have been absolutely clear. They did all they could, but they lack power to do more. So will the Minister correct herself? This doesn't cut both ways, does it? This is, as the member for Wigan just said, one of the worst, most despicable abuses of electoral law that we've seen in this House's lifetime.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point about the powers of the Electoral Commission, and that is something that has been put forward in their report, for example, on digital campaigning. As I've already said, the Government will be looking at those issues in the round.
Gray. Speaker, first Scottish Tory dark money, now the Electoral Commission showing the Leave campaign broke the law. We have these rules for a reason, to stop people buying our democracy, and yet the Minister appears complacent to that. So what confidence can our constituents have, not only in the referendum result, Mr. Speaker, but also the former and current government ministers who are involved in the running of Vote Leave?
Absolutely. And are they...
Mr. Speaker, I'll say it again. The issues in this report are extremely serious. It is right that they have been investigated. The Government is not going to comment on individuals or organisations that are subject to ongoing investigations. We hope those investigations will be speedily concluded, and we believe that that is a way to give further confidence to our constituents in this referendum and other elections.
In light of what the Electoral Commission have said today, and indeed the evidence that has been given to the Select Committee I serve on, DCMS, which clearly has proved that this referendum was won by cheating, will the Minister do what the Government should be doing and in fact call this referendum null and void and protect British democracy?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no is the answer to her question. We will not be rerunning the referendum. We will be continuing to deliver its result. But she reminds us that her Select Committee, an organ of this Parliament, is also conducting an ongoing investigation into fake news. There is another part of the larger set of issues that I'm referring to that I want us to be able to look at together.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This House is the guardian of free and fair elections. And it is now clear that this referendum result was corrupt because it was bought, quite possibly, with Russian money. Which minister will now ask the Director of Public Prosecutions to consider a joint enterprise prosecution so that it's not just the staff of these campaigns that are prosecuted, but the governing minds as well?
Mr. Speaker, the police have already received references from this investigation, and I think that stands for itself.
Aaron Back.
Minister understand that the anger is because we are not discussing a parish council election or a local authority by-election. This goes to the heart of the most important political and constitutional arrangement that has happened in most of our political lifetimes. And does she recognise that the scale of the fines being imposed are derisory, not just in terms of the overspend, but the size of the prize that the Leave campaign cheated to obtain?
Well done.
Mr. Speaker, I entirely understand that the points that people have come to the House here today to make. I'm simply acknowledging that there are broader issues than in only this report that need to be looked at together to continue to maintain confidence in our democracy. For the record, though, I think any election, parish council or otherwise, is important and deserves its security.
Darren Grimes-Feely has accused the Electoral Commission on Twitter today of putting him through hell, I quote, seeking to justify this by saying that I failed a box-ticking exercise. Can the Minister confirm that what's happened here is much, much more serious than that? The Electoral Commission has found that Vote Leave broke the law, that it cheated during this referendum and has undermined our democracy. And now what are the government going to do about that?
Mr. Speaker, certainly what is in this report today is very, very serious. Consequences follow, and that follows for those organisations that are named in it.
Mr. Speaker, the issue of the lack of transparency on social media political advertising is a problem for every democratic country. In the US, there are moves to prohibit anonymous advertising, whereby social media platforms will have to publish who pays for the adverts. Is this something that the British government are considering?
Yes, it is, Mr. Speaker. In response to a report by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, we will shortly be bringing forward a consultation on ensuring that there are imprints on digital campaigning material just as much as there would be on paper, and I think that's important.
Stella, Creasy.
Speaker, the Minister confirms that there is now an ongoing police investigation as a result of this report. Does she therefore not think it is right that all those who could potentially be part of that police investigation recuse themselves from government until it is concluded? Surely lawmakers should not be law breakers.
Mr. Speaker, it is not for me to confirm a police investigation. That is for the Electoral Commission. It is not for me to comment on what ought to be in a police investigation. That is for the independent regulator, and that distinction, I think, is quite important.
Thank you. Order. I'm very sorry to disappoint remaining colleagues, but I'm heavily constrained. The House is heavily constrained for time. Perhaps I can just give advance notice in respect of the statement which is about to be delivered, that the exchanges on it will need to be extremely brief. We have live debate on the trade bill, and the votes on the first group have to be at 3:30. So extended exchanges on the statement today will not happen. Statement: the Secretary of State for Defence